just, I love bugs because they do these transformative things. And this story also has somebody undergoing this transformative thing and a friend that sticks with them through that. I learned this story, or connected with this story, when I was traveling on the Mississippi River. I love rivers. I had a big experience on the Hudson River on a boat called the Clearwater, and then I came home and had a chance to do this project on the Mississippi River. Later on, I lived next door to the Haw River, and there's Haw River people here too. So yeah, rivers are a thing for me. And when I was traveling on the Mississippi, I was working with a big puppet show that started in Minneapolis and went all the way down to New Orleans. I just went on about the first third of the trip. And what would happen is we would pull into a little river town. There was a big school bus full of puppets and a lot of puppeteers and some kids that were along for the ride because their parents were puppeteers. And when we pulled in, we would start putting together these giant puppets and putting together the stage, and the kids in the neighborhood would start arriving on their bikes, and they would just watch the whole thing happen. And I think the show to them was kind of like, huh. But the whole thing of like the puppets coming out of the bus and getting put together and hanging out with these people all day was like, ooh. So we got to know some of those kids as we were traveling just for a day, but having this cool, real experience with them. And one of those kids, just south of the Twin Cities, was one of those kids that just was there the whole day, many, many, many hours. And at the beginning of the day, I was just talking to him. He was kind of a brown kid. I found out that one set of grandparents was Cheyenne, and that he spent a lot of time on a reservation north of the Twin Cities hanging out with his grandparents. And he told me that his grandparents told him stories all the time. I am a storyteller. I like stories. I went, ooh, you're lucky. Do you remember any of those stories? And he said, no. So I was like, okay. Rats. And we kept messing around, and the show happened, and we were packing up, and he was helping me take apart this big river puppet. And he said, maybe I do remember one of those stories. So this is a story that this kid told me, and his grandfather told him, and I'll tell you. Once, there were two boys who had grown up together their whole lives. They'd been babies together, they'd learned to walk together, they'd gone on their first hunt together, and finally, when they got to be young men, they decided to go off together and see some of the world wide around beyond their small village. And so they started off walking, and they walked, and they walked, and they walked a long way, and they saw lots of things that they had never seen before. But no matter how far they walked, and no matter what they saw, they never could find anything to eat. And so they got hungrier and hungrier and hungrier until finally they couldn't even walk a whole day. They were so weak from hunger that they could only walk for a few hours, and then they'd have to stop and rest to gather strength, since they weren't getting any strength at all from food. But still, they continued traveling. On one of these days, they came to a high prairie, and they said to each other, let's stop here. We've gone far enough for one day. And so they started to make their camp there, and one of the boys parted the grass, and there on the ground, he discovered two enormous eggs. And he called to his friend, he said, come on over here, look at what I found. These eggs, they're huge. They're big enough to be a whole meal for both of us. And his friend came over and looked at those eggs and said, hold on, I've never seen any eggs like that before. They might be some kind of magic. They might do us some kind of harm. But the boy who had found the eggs, he said, "These eggs won't hurt us. We're so hungry. We need this food. We're far away from home. We've seen lots of things we've never seen before. Probably some bird or some turtle that we don't even know about laid these eggs. I'm sure they're safe to eat." And so he took the eggs, the boy who had found them, and he roasted them beside the fire until they were cooked on all sides. And then he peeled back the shell of the first egg and he called to his friend. He said, "Come on, come and eat with me. These eggs, they're done just the way you like them and they smell so good." And his friend came over, but he refused to eat those eggs. And so the boy who had found the eggs, he ate all of the first egg and most of the second one as well. And then they went to sleep. Well, in the morning, the boy that had eaten the eggs, he called out to his friend. He said, "Oh, my legs, they feel so stiff, so heavy. I don't know if I can even walk." And his friend ran over and said, "Well, let me take a look." And he pulled off his friend's moccasins. And there, the skin on that boy's legs, it was not smooth and brown as a boy's legs should be, but they were striped and scaly like a snake's hide. But that boy, he got to his feet and he could walk, though with difficulty, and so they started off walking again. But as they walked, that boy's legs got heavier and heavier and heavier until he couldn't stand or walk at all. But he had to crawl along the ground, pulling his legs behind him. And he said to his friend, "You wouldn't leave me, would you? I could never survive without you like this." And his friend said, "No, of course not. I wouldn't leave you. We've been friends since we were babies. I'll stay with you until you're safe." And so they traveled on together. And that night, they came to a lake. And the boy who had eaten the eggs, he said, "I think if I could just get my legs wet, that would be good. I would feel better." And so his friend said, Fine, I'll make the camp. You go swimming. That'll be good. You get in the water." And so the one boy started to make the camp, and the other boy slid into the water. And as soon as he did, he started splashing and diving about in the water. He was singing and laughing and calling out. And his friend said, "Hey, what's happening?" And he says, "I feel great. I've never felt better in all my life." And the boy on shore said, "That's good, but come on out of there now. I don't want you to get overtired." And so that boy pulled himself out of the lake. And when he did, his friend on shore could see that that boy's legs had grown together, and the whole bottom part of his body was that of a snake's. Well, they spent the night there, and the next day they continued traveling. And on this day, that boy who was turning into a snake, he said, "I think I'm being called somewhere. I think there's some place that I need to get to, but I'm just not sure yet where, though I do feel we are traveling in the right direction." And so all that day they continued traveling in that same direction. And that night they came to another lake. And the boy said, "I'd like to spend the whole night in the water." And so all that night his friend on shore could hear that boy in the water singing and laughing and splashing and diving. And in the morning when he pulled himself out of the lake, his whole body was that of a snake's, and only his arms and his head were that of a boy's. Well, on this day they continued traveling, and on this day that boy who was turning into a snake, he said, "I think I know where it is I need to get to. I think I need to get to the Mississippi River, and if I could just get to the river, well, that would be good. And that night, they came to the Mississippi River, and the boy said, yes, this is the place that I've been called to, and this is the place where I'll stay, and you'll be able to leave me here, and I'll be fine. But don't go yet, he said. Please stay. Please stay until the morning. I've got something I want to tell you, a message to take back to our people. And so all that night, the boy on shore sang and prayed for his friend in the water. And it wasn't until the early morning that he fell asleep on the shore. And then, just a few hours later, he woke up hearing his friend calling from the water. And so he sat up and looked out across the river, but he didn't see his friend. What he did see was a fantastic beast in the water. It had a long and scaly tail like a serpent and a huge head like a dragon with horns growing out of it and red dots under each eye. And yet, that monster called to him with the voice of his friend. And so he walked down to the water. He was not afraid. And the monster swam up to the shore, and the two of them embraced. And then that boy, who had been a boy, said to his friend, go back to our people and tell them what has happened to me. Tell them that my body will stretch out to be the whole length of this great river. And tell them that when they come to the river, they should bring some kind of gift for their cousins that live under the water. And so even today, the Cheyenne people, not everyone, but those who still keep the old ways, when they come down to the river, they bring some kind of gift, some fruit, some tobacco, something for their cousins that live under the water.